Hello and good evening. My name is Sarah Cochran, and on behalf of the church, I would like to welcome you to our lecture this evening. Thank you so much for spending your Thursday before the Labor Day weekend with us. We're very, very grateful. My major reason for being is to ask you to silence your cell phone. Thank you for that scramble to do that. And it is my great, great pleasure to introduce our guest this evening, the renowned sculptor and installation artist, Alicr Aycock. I think you all know that by the generosity of Alice and her gallery, Thomas Schult in Berlin, we have Twister Grande tall in front of the church. It's exquisite. We love it, and it's also something that we know a number of people have looked at and thought, this is not a religious edifice. So we're very, very grateful for that. Obviously, Alice needs no introduction from her early work in the 70s in land art to her major large-scale sculptures that she did starting in the late 70s, 80s, to the Turbulence series that started in the 2010. Obviously, her extraordinary installations around the world, most recently in Stockholm, but obviously Paper Chase on Park Avenue in New York. And obviously her distinguished teaching career, teaching at RISD, teaching at Yale, teaching at Princeton, and obviously the School of the Visual Arts most recently, and the awards, the multiple NEA grants. She is a National Academician at the National Academy of Design. Obviously the Lifetime Achievement Award that she received from the International Sculpture Center, and the Academy of Arts Award in Visual Arts from Guildhall. So that is merely scratching the surface. Tonight we have the distinguished honor to listen to Alice herself. And with that, I would like to thank Alice for lending us Twister Grande Tall. I would like to thank you for being here tonight. And let's get tonight rolling.
With all the thanks, I would also like to thank Eric and April for inviting me to show Twister Grande at their beautiful building, and all of the extraordinary creative energy that is already happening and that will continue to happen. Here, I think the notion of stimulating young artists in the presence of older artists and dancers and musicians and architects and sculptors and painters is an enormous gift to the community. I also feel like I'm home in so many ways. I've been in the Hamptons for 33 years, one way or another, and Sag Harbor is my post office zip code, so it feels very much like being at home. I'm going to give you a little background. I really have been allotted 15 minutes, and I don't want to go too much over that. I hate when artists drone on and on. And those of you who are used to seeing a lot of images really fast, that's what we'll kind of do here. Twister Grande Tall is part of a series of works called the Turbulence series. And Eric and April and I discussed which of the series we would put here, install here. When we were discussing, we finally ended up with Twister Grande Tall. We did a numerous sort of looking at it in the computer, figuring out how it would look in terms of the church. There's a lot of virtual technology that goes on with what I do now. I like to say I'm voice directed, and then I have these very talented young people who work for me, who put up with me. And what happens with these pieces is They are first designed in the computer, and I may take weeks or months changing, pushing, saying no, make it taller, make it this, make it that. And then when I finally settle on it, that drawing, which is done in a program called Rhino, is sent to my fabricator in Fort Lauderdale, and he turns that into something called, forget the name of the program. And then what happens is that then they redraw it, keeping it exactly as Mama says. And then what happens is, as every part of this is drawn and every screw is located, every weld is located, then it is fed to their computer-driven machines, which cut these curves exactly as it has been designed in my computer. And then they begin to build it, and I thought you would like to see what it looks like in the fabrication studio. And there's a whole group of young, really artisans who build my pieces. I've worked with Eric Small, EES Design, I think since 2008. He started out as studying art and architecture design, and started out working on boats. And along with my, I don't know if I'd call him contemporary, Richard Serra, who also builds things in boat yards, the kinds of curves that these pieces need, you need someone who understands how to build boats. So you get a sense now of what it's like, and this is Twister Grande tall with these guys climbing all over it, welding, doing all this. And I come and go. With the COVID, I have not been able to come down and go, but I will fly down for the day, fly home, stay over. And that's how all these pieces have basically happened since 2008. What I would say is it starts first in my head, and it starts me going like this, frankly, and I'm always going like this. And then, as I said, I drive the people in my studio crazy. And I know it. And they just, eventually they stop talking to me. But as we design and I change, but once it's pretty much ready to go in SolidWorks down to Eric, that's basically it, except that I go down and, say, no, grind that a little bit more, do this, do that to it, or... and so this just, everyone always asks how these things happen, and I thought, let's start out with that, so you can see it's really like being in the world. In other words, it has to be engineered. Everything is done, once it leaves my head in the studio, then it becomes a very pragmatic sort of situation. And it's a lot like architecture, down to how it gets installed, how it gets trucked, and how we know ahead of time how it breaks apart. In this case, it was pretty simple, but so that a truck doesn't roll up and it doesn't fit. That happened back in the day, but it doesn't happen anymore. So this is how it arrived, and we had a great, incredible crew, fabulous crew. I'd like to have them for free for the rest of my life, as a matter of fact. Anyway, so years ago in the early 70s, I was starting out. I was a very young artist, and I got a chance to work at a place called 112 Green Street. And that was when we were all young and, I don't know, stupid maybe, but at any rate, so I wanted to make what I thought was a dust devil, and I got 2 tons of sand, and I put these fans around it, and I thought I would make a vertical dust devil, but instead it just made these kind of waves. But this wind was really important to me. And I believe Alicia Longwell decided back in 20-something or other to do a show about sand. And so on the right, we actually recreated that piece out here. And that was really the beginning. And then I went into architecture and I made a labyrinth, but the swirl around this piece was made by the people who drove around it to see it. This is back in 72, 73. this interest in curves and swirls and radiating diagrams has followed me throughout a lot of my career. Now, a lot of pieces look different from decade to decade, but I like to say in the end it's really all the same story. It just looks slightly different. So one is Storm King on the left, and the other on the right is the library in San Francisco that I collaborated with Jim Freed, who was a dear friend out here. So many people are no longer here, but they were dear friends. This is the East River piece on the left, big construction piece, and all these things. I mean, I don't do this on my own with my own hands. It's really a team of people, and I design it, make a little model, make my hands go like that, and then it goes on to a whole team of people. I do run the team, and I do yell from time to time. I think Lee, are you here? Have you witnessed that maybe once or twice? And on the right is Nashville, Tennessee. That river has flooded numerous times, and on the right, that piece is about 100 and some feet in the air, and it holds. It stayed. It did not fall yet. All right, so quickly, what happened was I came across Leonardo's drawings and the Deluge series. There are a whole series of incredible drawings, and I thought, whoa, Leonardo was interested in water and wind. Leonardo, and what I try to do is say, what am I interested in? You know, what bugs me? What is on my mind? What do I want to see that I haven't seen? And when I saw these drawings of Leonardo's, he's sort of science, magician, whatever, I said, yeah. So this is back in the early 80s, and I made something in the studio overnight called the Leonardo Swirl. And then I kind of left it, but I actually rebuilt this recently, and some museum wanted to give it back to me. So I said, okay, take it, I'll take it back at any rate. And so I have it. And so this was an early handmade piece called the Leonardo Swirl. And here you see all my sources. Some of them are hurricanes. There's Leonardo. There's Tatlin's Monument. I love amusement parks. I grew up near Hershey Park. And when things would get kind of rough at home, my father would say, let's go to Hershey. And we'd get on the Super Duper Looper, and but I'm interested in all kinds of images that have to do with wind and turbulence and water, including beautiful fashion, all this sort of the way the crinoline goes in her dress. Anything that strikes my fancy. It could be a cartoon, and I'll go, that's interesting. Maybe we can make a twister out of that. So these are sources, real sources. The guy on the right is the wind coming in on a canoe. Now, we've all experienced things in our lives, up and down, left and right, and I used to say, although what's going on right now is I may not be quite so brave, but I would say something's happening and I'm really having trouble with it. And then I'll transform it into a work of art. And so when these waves of panic go through me, I will feel it, and then it will become the wind in his hair. And I'll go, what would that look like if I made that hair into something, into a big, huge sculpture? I'm having a little trouble translating things right now, I might add, because actually it's all converging. But in any case, I have tried very hard to take the feelings. It starts first as feelings, and it may end up as looking very high-tech and hands-off, but it really begins with this sense of dance movement, sense of maybe euphoria, sense of panic, sense of whatever in my body, and then it gets translated into the wind and the waves and all of those things. This is Park Avenue as we looked at it when we were designing it, and this is Park Avenue, and I'm going to go quick. And so there were several pieces, I think 6 or 7, in the center of Park Avenue in 2014. And they were there for 4 or 5 months, and then they got scattered to various places. So this is on Park Avenue, and then this is in England at the Chatsworth. So you can see the pieces are very different when the environment changes. And this is really almost like paradise, I would say. But what happens with these pieces is they get taken apart, they get shipped on boats, they get replaced, and this is the crew. And you can see, they look happy. I think, you know, they're a little more worn out than they were back in when that picture was taken. And this is the piece that they eventually made. That's 80 feet long, and it's in National Harbor at MGM. And so the thing about these pieces is they're vortexes of energy, but people call these rosettes. And they also, I'm interested in cloud formations, smoke, wind, all of those types of images inspire me. So I'm just showing you various turbulence pieces, twisters, another twister, twister 2, twister 3. The first one that's the silver is the very first twister. I think it's in Cincinnati at a medical center. This is in Toronto on the lake, and I can't remember. These things have all been made since 2014 at different times up to now. This is in Texas and at a university. This is in DC, downtown DC, this is called Thunderdome. These pieces range from 25 feet, 27 feet. This one is 16 feet to 13 feet to some of them are 6, 7, 8 feet. But this is in a private residence in Louisville, Kentucky. I believe that's 15 feet. This is Sweden. And at the exhibition, what I did, I cited this, and citing really matters, as it does here in the church. And so I wanted that bridge and that piece to have a conversation with each other. And that curve, so you search for things in the environment that will make things have a good conversation and not just be there, but actually engage the context. This is finally the last piece that is staying in Sweden. The Swedes liked me, and this is a city called Borås, and we just installed it permanently in that city. So this is here, and this is the kind of orphan of, I think, of the summer. It's in Southampton. Eric was also responsible for that. And this is called Untitled Cyclone. So you could see it in the Southampton Arts Center. And quickly, and I'm moving very fast so I don't take up, again, drone on and on, some drawings. I do drawings all the time. Drawings are a way for me to be alone in the studio and have the world under my control as opposed to having a team and having to run so many things. It gives me great pleasure to draw, and I've done it all my career. And this was the beginning of the Twister series as drawings. I like to make this piece is right now in New York City at Marlborough Gallery. It's called Wavy Eniper. It's in fiberglass, and I work in fiberglass as well. I'll work in anything that works, so to speak, for whatever the form is. So this is the little Matilda that was on Park Ave. This is a small little Matilda. What looks very much like a petticoat, like a girl's dress. It was actually a woman's dress. It was taken from an origami dress. So once again, I get my sources from just about anywhere. If it's sites, it can be high, low, whatever. This is this Turbulence series, which was just played out. You get a sense of size and kind and how they change in terms of they're not all the same. They differ, but they're all about, in a sense, the same story. And here we are, ending with the church. Now, I used to say that I needed all this information in order to make my work, and there's someone sitting here in the front who was with me for many years as a young artist, and we used to read together, and he knows how I have this idea and this idea and this idea, and there were too many ideas and too many sources. And now I think there's very few sources, maybe all these stories were really the same story. So I'm going to read a poem, and then I'm sort of signing off. This is my favorite poet. His name is W.S. Merwin. He grew up in New Jersey, but he ended up in Hawaii, which is one of my favorite places. And this poem I've given to my students over the years, and I read it to myself when I need to. It's called Utterance. Sitting over words very late, I have heard a kind of whispered sighing, not far, like a night wind in pines, or like the sea in the dark. The echo of everything that has ever been spoken, still spinning its one syllable between the earth and silence. And that is what I hope Twister Grande Tall is. Thank you.
Do you want to get comfy?
I'll probably fall off the chair. Just leave me where I am, okay? Who knows what might happen tonight. All right.
Thank you, Alice. And I'd like to take you back, because I have two questions sort of juxtaposing the present and the past. But I've been very interested by the fact that for your master's thesis, you wrote about US highways. And you had this really beautiful distillation of them as both structure and experience. And it would seem to me that is one of the through lines of your work from the early period to turbulence. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think, and I think also the sense of moving on the highway and the way the highway, when it's working, kind of curves around and works sometimes with the land, I think was very important. And the fact that I showed the maze to begin with, which was my attempt to make a metaphorical highway, I think. But I think with these pieces that I'm doing now, the experience, unlike the early work where you actually did move through some of the pieces, you climbed them, you moved through them, the experience now is I believe, feeling I hope, the energy of the pieces in your own kinesthetic, it has a kinesthetic experience for you. And I can go on, and but I would say these pieces are not abstract in the formal sense of the word. They're actually, you feel them in the movement. You feel the movement, and they're diagrammatic in the sense I like to say, like dance. So you could almost kinesthetically engage them, even though you can't physically engage them. That helps, yeah.
I would agree with you, but I'd like to push this point a wee bit further, because I think there is something really interesting in your work, which is about kind of the divide between land art and perhaps landscape. Because for a lot of your pieces, you've said just in your presentation how important siting work is for you. So in that, it is about a discovery of a piece in a specific site, and therefore, to a certain degree, also about that movement of the viewer towards and then away from the piece.
Well, I would say when we chose this piece, we did think about some others as well, but looking at it, and of course I know the church really well, but we had architectural plans up for the piece. And if I were to say specifically about the church and the architecture of the church, the line, this sort of hard lines and the white, the clarity of the lines of the church, I tried to think of it as point counterpoint, that there was a dialogue going on between the two, and that it goes back and forth, and each one really speaks to the other. And the beauty of this period in architecture, which it is, the American Greek Revival, which is I'm a lover of actually Greek architecture too, and American indigenous architecture. The beauty of that with this other thing that is not so clear. It has a more or less chaotic, on purpose, organizational system, which I didn't talk so much about, but I am interested in the order of chaos, which is the order of nature. But the two having that conversation back and forth. I would also add that, ironically, so much art of the past has been made in the service of the gods, let's just say. And now here we are making art in the service of art in a church. And what I like about the piece is it also speaks to that random powerlessness, which is nature, which I think is the reason why we made art to begin with, frankly. To kind of speak to what we did not understand, but to pay homage or to try to control it, perhaps. So the two are having that conversation, and particularly with the architecture. I don't think, in terms of citing, it could be any better, the conversation that the two of them are having with each other. I hope, at any rate, yeah.
We've had a number of individuals who, when they look at this piece, what they see is a kind of rebellion of the strict hierarchy of the boards, sort of breaking away either into some kind of dance or some kind of movement. So to that, it would seem like the public is picking up on that in a very intuitive way.
Yeah, I think so. And the irony and the nice thing is they're almost caught with each other in a dance, that they both need each other to have that kind of conversation. And where it's yes, there's the clarity and the structure and almost of the discipline of the church, and then there's the seeming out of control notion, but they're wedded together in a way which I think they need to be. I don't, in this case, having one without the other wouldn't work, or at least that's the way I want it to work. You know, throughout my life, I've witnessed things, or as I said, felt things, and what I've always noticed is, particularly if you go back to the Greek myths, or to all of the churches and mosques, and you know, that it's both euphoric and it's also addressing terror. All art, most art, a lot of art has done that, and or the sublime and also the terrifying. And for me, I have to have both. I can't ignore it because that's been my life, and it has to be both. But of course, from the safe zone of art. And now we're not in such a safe zone, and I have to tell you, I'm having a little trouble with it, but as we all are. But I do think that, you know, that's part of what, as a child, that's what I learned from my parents. If something happens and you can make art out of it, okay, then you can control it, or you can do something with it. You're not just a deer in the headlights. So I'm going on and on, ranting a bit, as I do, but anyway.
Hardly. There is never a rigor to these sculptures. I mean, there's the rigor of their fabrication, there's the rigor of the kind of mathematics and the engineering, and, you know, given Hurricane Henri, thank you very much for that engineering. That was a great respite for us. But I'm interested in the color. I mean, the color is a uniform color for the series, as it was with Paper Chase, and that does lend a certain rigor to this kind of chaotic natural element.
Well, what happens with the color, now I have made some that stay the silver, and they, you know, they're more industrial and they're kind of a little rougher, I would say. They're a little more hardcore. There's one actually in Southampton that stayed the aluminum color. But the white really does, when the sun comes on it, it just shows all the different parts so well, and it shows the piece, if you know what I mean, the clarity of the piece and the lines and the curves. And so I just felt with the series that that's what needed to happen. And when it's when some of the other pieces that have stayed silver are not as good in terms of light, I guess, you know, or clarity. But I have started to do a few which I didn't show in blue. I have a strict kind of, I may go to pink and blue someday, I don't know. But I am doing some in blue as well, which Wavy Aniper is blue and white that I showed at the end. And also I'm doing a little bit of some of the Maelstrom rosettes are also having blue highlights. So it may not be always white, but I do think the way it just shows the lines and the curves and really comes to life in the sun is really important, as you can see it doing right now. Yeah.
And colour was something which was very important to some of your larger scale sculptures. Do you think of this kind of white as a reaction to that, or how did that transition happen?
Well, originally I was opposed to color. It was just back in the day when we were all so pure in the 70s, and it was whatever the material is, the material has to be that. And I learned a hard lesson that sometimes things, you know, you'd work and work and work and they wouldn't show up. You know, they were that material, but and you know, everything is a learning curve. But I think, I don't know if it's a reaction against color as much as it's just simply, because I said I am starting to do some things in blue. I think it's just that it shows the line so well that, you know, that is really why I'm doing it. I mean, the drawings are full of color now. They didn't used to be, but they are. And I think some of that has a lot to do with my working on the computer, and I'm able to play, and you can change things and test things. So the drawings are full of all, I'm having a lot of fun with my drawings and coloring them. I'm having a lot of fun, yes. But, you know, so, yeah, anyway.
I think another interesting kind of juxtaposition between these more recent series and some of the previous work is scale. I mean, for a long time, you've worked on a monumental scale. I mean, you obviously still are working on a large scale, but how has that transitioned from a monumental scale to this, which is a more approachable scale? How did that come about?
I think just in a natural, relaxed way for these. And although I did ship one off to somewhere in Mexico, I'm not sure where, and that's 32 feet. So these pieces actually can grow very tall if necessary. I would say that I have plans to build, I don't know if it'll ever happen now, but I had big ambitions to do my so-called last piece, which would take 10 years or 15, on a mountaintop in Hawaii, and it would be huge. And you couldn't, and it would be going back to the land thing a bit, and it would be a lot of spinning platforms. I go like this, intersecting each other, and a kind of whirlwind in which you never knew where you were, and it's really my last offering to whatever, the world as I see it. So I would say that no door is closed at the moment for me. And I'm always working on a number of things, but I do think COVID has kind of brought some parts of my overly ambitious ideas to a standstill for a while. But I think this is just part of if the opportunity arose, I would certainly be happy to build a piece that's a couple 100 feet long. So, if I'm given the chance and go back to, I like to say, Terrell and Heiser and all those guys, they knew what they wanted when they were 25 or 30. And I thought, I just want to wait and see what I think about this, that, and the other. But now I know. Now I want to do it. I'm ready to make my Terrell rodent crater.
In Hawaii.
Yes, where we can't get in and it'll probably sink into the Pacific anyway or whatever, but anyway.
Can you talk a little bit about Hawaii? Because Hawaii has become important to you.
Yeah, I started to go, apropos of here, my son who grew up in the summers and the weekends out here became an avid surfer, learned to sail down the street, and he then became a surfer. And you know, there's a pipeline with these surfer people all over to the great surfer places, and one of them is this little island called Molokai. So in order for us to be together at certain times, I would go wherever he wanted to surf. We started to go to Molokai, and it's really off the grid. And the way my world was, I was always on an airplane, always on this, in the middle of everything, and being off the grid felt wonderful. And so at some point, I bought about 25 acres on this little island that is really off the grid. And I planned this big project, which keeps, you know, it's kind of planned. But we are now in the time that we're in, and so who knows about anything. But it's still there, and I can't get rid of my 25 acres on an island. And for whatever reason, I can't. I have to keep it, even if it just sits there. So anyway, that's the idea. But in Molokai, you are up on this sort of lava hill, and you look out and you see the Pacific Ocean, and then you see stars that I didn't even know were there because there's no light pollution. And you really know that you are on a planet in the universe. And I think that's really important for us to remember that.
Spirituality has been a really important aspect of your work. I mean, critics have talked about the sort of centrality of architecture, sort of spirituality, and engineering, for want of a better word. You've mentioned more recently that perhaps that has changed for you. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I don't want to offend anyone, but you know, I don't believe in God, but I sure do miss her. And that was from the New Yorker. So not me. I suppose I credit my early childhood with giving me a sense of awe. I think awe, and not awesome, which is overly used, but a sense of awe or wonder. But at the same time, I am really hardcore science. And but that doesn't mean that we don't wonder about the mysterious. There's so many things. You know, years ago I read something by Levi-Strauss, which was, and I thought he was an anthropologist, and he said, scientific thinking has always existed for human beings, as has magical thinking. And when we don't have control, we go into magical thinking, and we all do. But at the same time, science is, I'm a firm believer, a firm believer. So it's just that when you get on that airplane, probably everybody says a little magical incantation. We all do it, but, and we all have mysterious things in our life that we, but it's that kind of back and forth. But in truth, I really am a hardcore, I don't go into any of that, I can't even meditate, and I'm sorry, I know I'm offending everyone, but it's really hard for me to do that. And I know it would help, but so anyway.
Another French critic said something really lovely, which is beyond research, you have to have inspiration. And maybe that's sort of a parallel to what you're talking about, this intersection of the work, the structure, and then the thing that takes it beyond that into the realm of art.
Well, Levi-Strauss said the necessary structure and the contingent event. And that is, I think, the dynamic. It just keeps working and working for me, as does theory of evolution. But that is the necessary structure and the contingent event. I would end with one story, which is sort of, and I don't do it now because I don't want those trees to fall on me. But when I was a young girl and an adolescent, I was in my bedroom, first story bedroom, and the wind was extraordinary. It was February, but it got warm. So I opened the window and I crawled out, and it was just me in the darkness and the wind, and I just danced to the wind, and it was so euphoric. And I often think with the Twister series that it is that sense of me dancing at the best of times, not the fearful times we're in right now, but in the wind, with the wind moving through you, and it's almost effortless, and you really do feel like you're there with all of that power, so to speak. So, okay. No, maybe we should let them have
Okay, we'll let you have the questions. Yes.
Yeah. Don't make it too hard, Ralph. Okay.
It's not so much of a question as an observation. I've been looking at the projection, and I realized that the scale of the ribbons of metal is exactly the same proportion as the cladding on the church.
Yeah.
And then you have the arc of the window over it. And so it's a kind of a symbiosis. It's perfect. So that I'm thinking, well, maybe the church gave birth to the sculpture, and when the sculpture grows up, it'll be another church. That's all I have to say.
Okay, yeah. All right, so. Lee, do you want to say anything? You're the architect of this beautiful church. Do you have anything you'd like to? Oh, April, go ahead, yes.
Well, mask off for a second.
Yeah.
I love this sculpture. We're so happy that it's here. I think that it's the most amazing thing. And I think one of the reasons that it works so happily where it is that it's slightly contained by it being in a corner. And to me, it always is struggling to like burst free of it. But it's also settled into its own form, which of course is where it started. So it's a stupid thing to say. On the other hand, I've seen people walking by the church who just literally, like especially when it first went in, stopped dead in their tracks. They were so knocked out by it. And then of course, just because, the church, I'm thinking like, it's just the embodiment of creative energy. It has this kind of yearning to grow. It feels like it's growing and collapsing. I love that you referenced chaos theory and complexity theory, all that stuff, because it has all that stuff in it. Like it's entropic and it's bursting and it's just so beautiful. I love it. And I just wanted to ask one question. Are you fond at all of Bernini? Like for instance,
yes.
Daphne?
Yeah,
Because
yes.
that's the other thing that it makes me think of. It's such a metamorphosis within its own self, and it's a really subtle metamorphosis, obviously, because it's not becoming anything in particular.
Yeah.
But it becomes and subsides and then takes off in another direction all at once. I think it's just so brilliant. So we're just super grateful that it's here.
Thank you. I think that thing of talking about the creative energy, because we as artists, and I know there are quite a few in the room, there is that turbulent when you're trying to come up with the idea and you're trying to realize that idea and you're trying to nail it and you're this, that, and the other, and it is, that sort of frenzy of excitement and energy and fear and all of it. And so I'm glad you mentioned that, because that really is, it's kind of a sort of metaphor for that exact feeling as well. Yeah. And that's what goes on here, is all that, particularly with the young artists and the residents who will be here. We all, I think, we like to pretend that we know, but in fact, with each new work, it's always an adventure, and it's always a little scary, and it's always, that's the excitement of it all. Like, are we gonna pull it off? And the painting, the sculpture, the photograph, the whatever, and that's why we do it. And so I think that it's a great testimony to what's going on here inside the church. So, is there a question over here? Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. I've always been curious about the collaboration between the sculptor and the fabricators. I have a friend who's a fabricator and feels like an unsung hero a lot of the times in the work. I'm curious about, it's your inspiration, it's your design. What happens to make it actually work and like stand up and do the things that it's supposed to do? How does that happen?
Well, it's a team, and it's more like architecture in that sense. But what I would say is, over the years, they all get paid very, very well. So I wouldn't feel too bad for them. Because, but what I would say is when I started out by saying that it doesn't leave my studio until it's exactly what I want it to be, that I actually have more control than I would when I was just doing it more or less the old-fashioned way. When in the studio, every curve is looked at, walked around, looked at it from above, looked at what a 5'10" person, or in my case 5'3" person would see, all of it. And then, it's technology that is allowing this. And yes, I do pay homage to them, you saw them all. But in a sense, it's like it's Alicr Aycock, and sometimes maybe there's resentment. Anyone who's worked in an architectural or whatever studio knows, people move on. You learn a lot, frankly. But I always acknowledge that it's a huge team. I mean, I'm not an engineer. The fact that we know that was engineered to 120 miles an hour wind is part of a team of an engineer who gets paid well to tell me that. So I guess, But I would also say that when something isn't working, the phone calls come to me, all right? When somebody's unhappy up in Toronto and they owe me God knows how much money because they're unhappy, it's on me, not the fabricator. They get paid. All right. Now, don't get me started, because you'll see the other Alice. All right. The one who plays, All right. The buck stops with me, and the phone calls in the middle of the night are all the worry, or keeping the whole show on the road. It's not delegated. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. This was wonderful and brought this to life for me, because I've passed it a lot but never understood it the way I did after hearing you. My question has to do with series, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, because you've had some distinct series, and they're kind of an evolution, I would assume, one after another, slightly changing and being affected by whatever your latest thoughts and everything are. When do you realize you've come to the end of a series? You've completed it and it's time to do something new.
That's a really interesting question, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I think it's when I'm just not, I'm working on a couple new ones right now, but I think that there will come a point in which I will become bored. And and then an artist has to be really honest with themselves about that. And sometimes, I always think I'm the best person to sort of curate my own work, but I may not be. I think that, I've been doing this since I was 22, 21 years old, so I'm pretty old now. There are whole periods that my art dealer will come to me and say, well, that's the 80s, I don't like it. But I say, well, I did it, I like it. So there's a point at which, you know, it's a really interesting question. The series will evolve and it may come to an end at a certain point in the next couple of years. I mean, my hope is that I get to build this land piece that I want to do really badly, which is going back, and that I have the ability to do that. You know, a lot of artists who get successful get trapped in having to produce the same thing because, you know, and it's brave, as we all know, to let go and move on. But after all these years of however many, I'm used to people literally say, I like the 70s and I like now, but the rest of it, yeah. And so I'm used to it, and hopefully I've got tough enough skin to, you know, go on to the next thing, whatever that is.
So you have tough enough skin.
You think so?
We know that. In the interest of full disclosure,
Yeah.
we've been close friends for I don't know how many years. And it's just been such a great little journey together. We've always talked about working together, and then this happened. And, you know, what's interesting to me is that we're trying, and I always say this to you, that we're trying to do exactly the same thing. We're trying to defy gravity. And the church is such a perfect place, and the life that Eric and April have brought into it, it's all about lightness, it's all about spaciousness and airiness. And architecture could do that in a certain way. You know, we're dealing with an existing building. Churches tend to look heavy, and they tend to look rigid, and everything we tried to do was to counteract that with lightness and openness. And then a sculptor comes in and just does it. I mean, it's just so breathtaking and so intuitive feeling. And for me, the juxtaposition of the two ways of defying gravity is what gives it a kind of frisson that I really admire, and I admire you.
Oh, well, thank you. Same here. I just want to, I think it's time, but give a shout out to the fact that Eric and April are giving back, you know, in such an extraordinary way to creative experience and artists. And I mean, it's an amazing gift. I'm a little too selfish to do that still, but I do teach, and so I know that's my little tiny bit of trying to pass it on, pay it forward, so to speak. But I think this is, I'm just really just so happy that this building is here, that it's doing what it's doing, that it's that it is a church, and thank you. I think it's a great gift to the community. Really a marvelous, marvelous gift. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alice.